We are we are going to be talking tonight about greeting one another with a holy kiss. Hopefully you got one of the handouts. As we just go through and we're thinking about what it means to be a part of the body. Members of one another, I think, was the very first lesson. And so we've spoken about having peace with one another and different. I think it seems like last time, 2 weeks ago, we talked about serving one another. And so we're just continuing on with the one another's. And tonight it's going to be greeting one another with a holy kiss. That verse is actually, and I'll go ahead and put it up on the screen. We're looking in Romans chapter 16. In Romans chapter 16, let me move it down a little bit. It's down further in the chapter. In Romans 16 at verse 16, greet one another with a holy kiss. The churches of Christ greet you. And so I was just thinking about that idea of greeting one another with a holy kiss. So let's just go ahead and get into our questions. The first one is I wanted you to find other passages where this same phrase is used, and then we'll talk about what the phrase means. So, did anyone find any other passages where the same thing is said? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
2 Corinthians 13:12 is one.
Okay, 2 Corinthians 13:12,
First Thessalonians 5:20
First Thessalonians chapter 5,
and First Peter 5:14.
and First Peter 5:14.
Those are the only
And
ones.
okay, anyone find any others?
Uh,
Go
First
ahead, Pat.
Corinthians 16 and 20.
And First Corinthians chapter 16 also has the phrase or something very similar to the phrase. So now the question is, what does it mean? Greet one another with a holy kiss. Anyone want to tackle that one for us?
Holy means set apart, sanctified, right?
Do what now, Pat? What'd you say?
Holy means sanctified or set apart. So,
Okay. Holy is the idea of sanctification.
okay.
Yep.
So with a sanctified kiss, it would be a different kind of kiss than some kisses we do.
And Pat, you're all over it tonight because that was the point that I wanted to make. That I I kind of thought someone might just point to the cultural aspect of greeting one another with a kiss. We're going to look at a passage when it's all said and done. Do you remember when Jesus went to a certain Pharisee's house? And the fellow happened to be named Simon, and that the woman comes to him. And that's where, Simon says, and it's Luke 7 is where the account happens. The woman comes and she starts weeping and she's kissing the Lord's feet. And the Lord makes the statement. This is Luke 7, let's see, at verse 44. Says, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet. She has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. And that the man did not even do the cultural norm, if you will. The man did not even give him the cultural kiss. So Pat, I appreciated your comment because this is not just a cultural thing. This is not just greet one another with a kiss. This is greet one another with a holy kiss. And there's something to be said about that. Anyone have any other comments? Keith, I'm going to try to do better about Keith types things in. Yeah, peace and unity and given by the Holy Spirit, the idea of sanctification. Anyone have any comments on greeting one another with a holy kiss? Go ahead, Mark.
Um, so yeah, warm affection, brotherly love, uh, aspect of familial love. Uh, I saw this. They said it was unique to the first century church in one sense. So
In a certain sense, that there is a cultural aspect of the kiss, and there may be countries who still greet one another with a kiss. You might think about some of the European countries, things along those lines. So there is a cultural aspect, but then there is the holiness aspect. And, and Mark's point about affection and things along those lines. Um, you might just think about somewhat of a probably a silly analogy. You go to a movie, you go to the movies. Nobody goes to the movies anymore. But anyway, you go into a movie theater and there's someone sitting about, halfway up and, there's not that many people there and there's just a few people sitting in the middle of the auditorium. Well, in that movie theater, where are you going to sit? If you're like me, you go to the movies, it's like you're not going to sit right next to the person. Well, why are you not going to sit right next to them? Because you're not there for them. You're there to watch the movie. Now, if we treat the church the same way, we got a real problem. Because the question and the issue is, do you really love your brethren? Do you really love them? Do you want to be there with them? Do you enjoy being there with them? And you can just tell, you can tell to think about what we're talking about tonight by how people greet one another, whether or not they really love their brethren. And so here Paul is, and as well as Peter, one of those verses was in Peter, and it's greet one another with a holy kiss. Uh, Anyone else have comments or questions or anything?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mark, and then Paul.
Just going to say, I just saw an example of that, in Rhode Island. There's one church in Lincoln, and the brethren, very devout group. And one fellow had his wife with him, and she was just kind of taking halting steps, almost
Yeah,
staggering a little bit. He said it was Rosalie was his wife, and her mental faculties were fading. So she spent most of the Bible study time just kind of shuffling around, and a number, of the members just kind of take her and held her and walked with her
yeah,
gently, around and so forth.
right.
And some other things there. You could just see the care for one another. They were just very
Yeah,
devout, I guess you'd say.
yeah. Paul, what were you going to say?
yes, I think it's something that I particularly experienced this morning. So it's really wonderful to be among brethren, and I think as John was mentioning, there's a cultural aspect to it. But the fact of the matter is, in whatever culture, there's always the greeting.
Yeah,
So, and of course, in question two, we'll talk about this, in the opposite sense. But what is that genuine love that sets us apart
right.
in front of the world, between brethren? That holy greeting. And it's really not so much of the action itself, but the motivation behind it. And
Yeah,
I really appreciate, especially when Mark comes to me, it's such a welcoming form of greeting, that immediately you're not thinking of, okay, I'm from Singapore, you're from America, but all of a sudden, we're all brethren in Christ. And that is that hagio, that special greeting that's
yeah.
only peculiar to Christians and that we should show to one another.
And as Jesus goes to the cross and he says, "This is how the world will know you're my disciples if you have love for one another." If you don't have love for one another, well, then the world's going to be like, why would we ever want to be a part of that? If there's animosity between brethren, I mean, the world can, Paul, if you would have come in this morning and if we would have been squabbling and fighting and throwing things at one another, you probably wouldn't be on here tonight with us. It's my guess. But it was good to have you this morning and appreciate your comment. Let's go ahead and go on to question number two. Looking in the context of Romans chapter 12, verse 9, and let me go ahead and put this one up on the screen. We are, let's see, in Romans chapter 12. Let's see. Down at verse 9, it says, "Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good." We don't have time to read the whole chapter, but I hope you looked at it to answer the question because it was looking in the context of Romans 12, verse 9. what would hypocritical love look like? It's just kind of an odd thing, to say, let love be without hypocrisy. Well, it's like, well, of course love should be without hypocrisy, and yet Paul feels the need to say it. You might think about in that first century, in Rome, there's a whole lot in Romans, about Jew and Gentile. And so you might think about how they were thinking about each other. And so that's probably a big reason why the Holy Spirit through Paul has to say, let love be without hypocrisy. But just in thinking about that, the question is, what would hypocritical love look like and how might you describe it?
So, John,
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
uh, it might look like Joab being friends with Abner, but taking him and sticking his knife into his belly. It's that's what it might look like.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with that account, David had just dined with Abner. Am I remembering that right, Bruce?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then has effectively made peace with Abner. And Abner has gone on his way. Joab effectively runs after him and says, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you for a second," and promptly sticks a knife in his gut.
yeah.
It is basically what happens. And needless to say, Abner was not expecting the knife in his back
That's good.
at all. Any other thoughts or comments? What would hypocritical love look like? Go ahead, Pat.
I believe there's a scripture somewhere. I was just trying to find it where he deals with that a little bit. He says, if you see your brother in need and you just say, okay, well, you know,
Yeah, that's James 2,
then
Oh,
you go on your way and you don't do anything to help him.
right? James chapter 2, if your brother comes to you and he doesn't have food, he's naked and destitute, and you say to him, depart and be warmed, but you don't give him the things needed for the body, what is it? It's like,
It's
it's,
hypocrisy.
yeah, that is hypocrisy. James also taught, that's faith without works is dead. That's the same chapter. That's that one, James chapter 1, this one's religion is useless, right? Uses that same phrase. Other thoughts? You might especially look in Romans 12, and you just kind of have to take the opposite,
Yeah.
because Romans 12 verse 9, let love be without hypocrisy, abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor, giving preference to one another. If it's always I got to have my way, if it's selfishness, if I'm not giving preference to others, then there's a problem. Not lagging in diligence, verse 11. And that if we're lagging in diligence, then our love is filled with hypocrisy, frankly, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope. You just go through Romans 12 and you just consider the opposite of each one of those. Given to hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. The whole thing concludes with, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And so all of that feeds into what our love should be like. Other comments or questions? Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, it's interesting that Brother Bruce brought out that betrayal, and there are actually 7 times that's mentioned in King James Version of kiss. And interestingly, the one other time that was mentioned was the kiss that Judas Iscariot gave to
Right.
Jesus. And as you know, as pointed out by Bruce in this example, this is another example of betrayal. It's supposed to be a greeting, but yet that was a sign, to take Jesus down.
Yeah. One of the places where the word kiss shows up in the Old Testament is when Isaac is old and Jacob deceives him. And seems like Isaac says, "Come and kiss me, my son." And Isaac says, "Aren't you Esau? Are you Esau?" You know, and you have that whole conversation and the deception that's happening. But yes, Judas with the kiss, and you can tell, you know, when that happens with Jesus, Jesus actually kindly, but Jesus does call him out on it. Jesus actually says, "Are you betraying me with a kiss?" And that's exactly what Judas was doing. He was betraying him with a kiss. That was the sign. Concerning, you know, let love be without hypocrisy. A couple other passages I thought we might consider. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, you have a whole chapter about what love does. You know, this is 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up. Love does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. It's like that. That's what love does. You know, what was the problem in Corinth? They had a lot of problems, but one of their problems was they did not love one another. You know, they had the gifts of the Spirit, and yet they are filled with jealousy and envy and animosity towards one another. And it's like they had the gifts of the Spirit. They had they had people in that congregation who were doing miracles. They had people in that congregation who were speaking in tongues. They had people who were interpreting. They had all those gifts there. And yet Paul says at the beginning, I can't even talk to you as mature because they were filled with envy and strife. They didn't love one another. Those gifts of the Spirit were no substitute for love. They weren't. They needed to love one another. So you might, you know, in thinking about that, another passage that comes to mind are, you know, Galatians, in talking about the fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh. You know, there in Galatians, where I know y'all have studied recently, and and what this is this is what love looks like. And then this is what hatred looks like. And so the works of the flesh, you know, in Galatians 5, verse 19, adultery, fornication, uncleanness. And it's like, oh, well, I don't do any of those things. You know, I don't fool around on my wife. I don't fornicate. But then it goes on, idolatry, sorcery. It's like, well, I'm not an idolater either. Hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like. What most people think that Paul does pretty often when he has a longer list like that is that at the beginning of the list, he has things that are very obvious. And at the end of the list, there are things that are very obvious. And what he's really wanting to focus on is what's in the middle. So, you know, did Paul really need to tell the Galatians, hey, adultery is sinful? Adultery is a work of the flesh. It's like they should have known that. Did he really need to tell them that murdering was a work of the flesh? They knew that. What's the real problem? And it's those things that are in the middle. Hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath. That's the reason the passage right before this, up in verse 15, that's where that paragraph ends. But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. Like this is, you know, and they would have claimed to have loved one another. We're in Galatians here. Think about the idea. Peter would have said that he loved the Gentiles. And yet, what did Paul have to do when certain men came from Jerusalem? It's like he had to withstand him to the face because he was to be blamed because he and even Barnabas were caught up with what? Hypocrisy. Let love be without hypocrisy. So then you look what the fruit of the Spirit is: love, joy, peace, long suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self control. Against such there is no law, and those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. This is what the fruit of the Spirit looks like. Remember what Jesus said, is it in the Sermon on the Mount, when he says, talks about false teachers, and he says, you'll know them by their fruits. It's like you'll know them. This is like boats in the ocean. You can judge how big a boat in an ocean is based on its wake that it leaves behind it. And it's like you just look at what it leaves. If it leaves the fruit of the Spirit, then you know there's love there. If it leaves the works of the flesh, then it's what we're talking about. And so he says, let love be without hypocrisy. Questions, comments about any of this? All right. Question number 3 then. Read Romans 16. We don't have time to read it. I hope you read it. The last chapter in Romans, and I just wanted you to think about what sort of things stood out to you, because there's something in Romans 16 that's really cool. Anything stand out to anybody in that chapter? It's one of those chapters that honestly, most people usually, it's like, oh, it's just the last chapter. Skip it. It's sort of like the genealogies, the genealogies with all the names. And it's like, oh, just skip it. And then years later, you come back and you realize, oh, there's actually a point the genealogies are given. And in Romans 16, there's a point to be made. Anything stand out to anyone? Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I'm just really impressed by the fact that Paul, the Apostle Paul, will actually go through the trouble to address and greet every single individual.
Yeah,
And I think it's really important to have that personal relationship one to another.
right.
And interesting fact also, both men and women are mentioned. So certainly God is no respecter of persons. We can all serve God to the best of abilities. There's no need to be so-called equal to, so to speak. Both men and women can serve in their respective roles and be well-pleasing to God.
Yep. The whole chapter starts off with the comment about Phoebe and how he wanted them to help Phoebe with the job that she had. And then he just goes through and he starts naming them by name. And it's like he easily could have just said hello to everybody in the congregation there. And I mean, think about, I wish Zoom told me how much time we had left. Paper was a valuable resource back then. In another passage, when Paul says, send Mark and bring the parchments, you have that passage. Paper was a hot commodity. And that's why scribes back then, they would fill up every inch of the parchments. And it was extremely valuable. So for the Apostle Paul to take the space, to take the time and the space on this letter to start naming them by name. And he just goes through one by one. And I understand some of them he does speak more generally. He talks about greet the church that is in their house, verse 5. But he goes through and he lists, and I didn't count them, but there's probably, I don't know, 20, to just throw a number out there, 20 or 30 names. And you can tell he knows them personally. He knows them personally. He loves them personally. So in another passage, we spoke about the one, what comes upon me daily is my deep concern for all the churches. When Paul thought about the churches, he probably wasn't just thinking congregationally. He was probably thinking individually within those congregations. And it just stands out to you that he goes through and it's just name by name. And, we see Priscilla and Aquila there. We know where we're introduced to them. They were the ones, they were tent makers, and Paul was with them for a time. They're also instrumental in talking to Apollos. So some of these other names we see mentioned in other places, but some of them we don't. Quite a few of them we actually don't. But Paul knew who they were. And you can tell just how close he was to them, how much he loved them, and undoubtedly how much they loved Paul as well. And so it's just a wonderful thing. Now, I would say you would like to think that the last chapter is all roses and rainbows. It's not. Because the other thing mentioned in chapter 16 towards after the list, verse 17, now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you learned and avoid them. That's probably those who he's talking about there. They would be the ones who are loving hypocritically. They're serving their own belly, if you will. They're interested in their own agendas, whatever it is. Any questions or comments about that point? Go ahead, Brenda.
In verse 7,
Uh-huh.
he's greet Andronicus and Junia, my kinsfolk and my fellow prisoners. Does he really mean an actual relative, or is he just talking in, a very friendly, brotherly way towards these people?
Not sure. New King James uses the word countrymen.
Hmm.
But I will say further down in the account,
Yeah.
there in verse 13, did you notice that greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother and mine?
Yes.
And so, I mean, there's,
Hmm.
not outside of the realm of possibility.
Hmm.
So, do you remember? Let me go back and find it. When Paul, before his name is changed, when Saul of Tarsus obeyed the gospel, and here's my let me look. I thought, am I not remembering right? I thought he went back. Let me go look up something real quick.
Acts something.
Didn't he go back to Tarsus?
Yes, I think so.
I thought he did. Yeah, in Acts chapter 9 at verse 30, they sent him out to Tarsus.
Mhm.
Let's see, let me get back. To think about that, I think that's wonderful because, here he was, he had been taught at the feet of Gamaliel and a Pharisee, tribe of Benjamin, all those things. And all of a sudden he becomes a Christian. And Brenda is somewhat to the point about his family. Well, where's one of the first places he goes to work? It's like, you got to go back home. He goes back home, and when he goes back home, he's trying to undo the damage he had done, probably.
Mhm.
He goes back home with the gospel. And so I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility at all to think that, there in Romans and in other places perhaps, any family that he had, I mean, we know he wasn't married. We know he didn't have, children, earthly children, so to speak. But other family members, undoubtedly, he tried to reach them. Undoubtedly. Anyway, it's just something to consider. Any other comments or questions anyone has? Anything you wanted us to see?
The only other thing with Romans 16,
Mhm.
at the end it says proclamation was said in verse 26 that the scriptures have been proclaimed to all nations.
Yep. The prophetic scriptures made known to all nations according to the commandment of the everlasting God for obedience to the faith. I always enjoy when people make the point that Romans chapter 1, Romans, where Protestants like to take Romans and they think that you don't really have to obey, that it's faith only. When Romans starts and Romans ends by talking about obedience. And that really is how it is. It even ends with for obedience to the faith. And so, Brenda, to your point about being made known to all men, what Jesus tell the apostles? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And the gospel goes out. What is it? Jude verse 3, contend earnestly for the faith which was once and for all delivered to the saints. And it's gone out. Any other questions or comments? The last question we've actually already kind of answered along the way. What other kiss passages may pertain to this discussion? And the one, I had a couple on my list, you may have others, but one of them has got to be Judas. And, it's just a great sadness
Mhm.
that the last time he saw Jesus, he was betraying him with a kiss. That's a great sadness. He, that really is, that's horrible to even think about. He could have told those soldiers, I'll point him out. I'll go stand by him. You know, I'll he could have pointed him out a multitude of other ways, but he specifically chose to do it with a kiss. And that's just so sad. And Jesus calls him friend in that passage too. He says, "Friend, are you betraying me with a kiss?" And the truth of the matter was, did Jesus love Judas? Absolutely. Did Judas love Jesus? He betrayed him, the son of perdition, and was not long for this world. Anyway, great sadness. One of the other kiss passages is that woman who is kissing the Lord's feet. And the Pharisee had given him no kiss, even the cultural kiss. And that woman had not ceased to kiss the Lord's feet. Well, one of the other things I'll mention just with time we have, it seems like the Greek word for worship, actually it's the Greek word. Now, here's your two cent word for the day. It's proskuneo. But what that means is to kiss. It seems like there's something in that definition that means to kiss towards. And it's just the idea of worship and adoration is the idea. And that as we think about worshiping the Lord, there's a passage in it, and it's early on in the Psalms. Let's see if I can find it. This is Psalm chapter 2, verse 10. Now therefore be wise, O kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are those who put their trust in him. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry. And it's bow the knee. And he is our first love. Any other questions or comments? That's pretty much everything I had for the evening. Just as we have been thinking about greeting one another with a holy kiss, and kind of the point y'all have made. Culturally, we don't kiss each other in greeting in this country, but you might think about, the right hand of fellowship, and we shake each other's hands. Um, you might think about things pertaining to those lines. Let me see. What one of the things, as we greet one another, and this is you teach your kids. Teach your kid here. We still have 2 minutes. When someone asks your children, and my kids are in the other room right now, Lily, how are you today? Stephen, how are you today? Now, what are they supposed to do when someone asks them how they are? You answer the question, and then what?
Ask them how they are.
You throw the ball back, right? They spoke to you. Lily, it's good to see you today. How are you doing? I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. And how are you doing? Now, Pat, since you answered, I'll pick on you. If Pat, if you ask me, if you said, John, how are you doing? And I said, good. Wow, that silence got real awkward real quick, didn't it?
Yes.
And when people don't even have the kindness to throw the ball back
Mhm.
and to ask how you're doing. And we are called to be members of one another. And so we greet one another with a holy kiss. And let love be without hypocrisy. We have 1 minute and 20 seconds left. Anybody have any other comments? Go ahead, Mark. Oh, sorry. I thought Mark had something. He does not. I saw his pencil up. I thought he had something. Sorry, Mark. Anyone have anything else? All right. Appreciate y'all being on here this evening. Hope the study has been beneficial. Everybody take care. Pat, I'm going to call you here in a minute, okay?
Sure.
All right.
No
Everyone
problem.
take care. Bruce and Brenda, when are y'all coming back?
I'm coming back Tuesday. Then I'm
Okay, so you're leaving her down there.
27th of June.
Okay. All
And
right.
they'll both be back July 1st.
Okay. Y'all stay safe on the road.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Appreciate y'all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.